Welcome to the channel. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the bell icon to stay updated with every new story. He gave his leftovers to a hungry little girl, but what she said next changed his entire life. Marcus Chen sat at the far corner of an elegant restaurant tucked away in Midtown Manhattan, the kind of place where deals were sealed over aged whiskey and business cards passed as currency. The room was filled with the gentle hum of soft jazz and quiet conversations, but Marcus heard none of it. His mind was buried deep in a thick stack of papers sprawled across his table, documents entirely in Spanish, legal, technical, dense. A critical acquisition involving one of Spain's fastest-growing logistics firms had reached its final phase, and the paperwork needed urgent review. The problem? His trusted translator had dropped out hours earlier without explanation. No replacement, no warning, just silence. Marcus had always prided himself on control. Control of his time, his company, his image. But tonight, with the clock ticking and his appetite gone, control was slipping through his fingers like sand. He leaned back in his chair, running a tired hand through his dark hair. The glass of whiskey next to him remained half full, untouched. His dinner, grilled salmon and asparagus, cooled on the plate, forgotten. His thoughts spun in circles, trying to recall any Spanish phrases from his college days, any fragment of understanding that could help him salvage this mess. But nothing came. His phone buzzed again. Another message from legal asking for an update. Another reminder that the deal couldn't wait. He was about to respond with a vague excuse when a small voice interrupted him. "Excuse me, sir. Can I eat what you're not finishing?" Marcus turned, slightly startled. Standing by his table was a little girl, 6, maybe 7 years old, barefoot, with blonde hair braided into 2 thin plaits. Her red t-shirt was faded, her denim skirt frayed at the hem. Her big blue eyes stared up at him, wide and hungry, but steady, without a trace of fear or shame. He blinked, confused for a moment. Was she alone? How did she get into a place like this? "You want my leftovers?" he asked, glancing at the half-eaten plate. The girl nodded solemnly. "I'm hungry." He looked around the restaurant, expecting someone, anyone, to step in. A parent, a waiter, a manager. But no one came. The room carried on as if nothing unusual had happened. "Take it," he said, pushing the plate toward her. "I can't eat anyway. I've got too much going on." She didn't immediately dig in like he expected. Instead, her eyes fell on the papers scattered in front of him. "That's Spanish," she said, pointing with a small finger. "Yeah, and it's a problem," he muttered, not really paying attention. She hesitated, then added quietly, "I can read it if you want." Marcus let out a short breath of disbelief. "You can translate legal documents? At your age?" The girl didn't flinch at his skeptical tone. "My mom was a translator. She taught me before she got sick." Something about her voice, direct, certain, without the usual uncertainty of childhood, stopped him from brushing her off. Out of nothing but curiosity, or perhaps desperation, he pulled one sheet from the pile and handed it to her. "Go ahead. Let's see what you've got." The girl looked at the paper, her small finger moving along the lines of text. "This part here," she began, her pronunciation crisp and clear, "means they're charging an extra fee for international logistic storage, but it's written like it's optional. You can decline it." Marcus froze. She was right. He knew enough to understand that much. "And this clause," she continued, pointing to another section, "says they'll retain partial ownership of your assets in Spain unless you reject this paragraph. You should reject it." Marcus leaned forward, stunned. Her pronunciation was flawless. Her comprehension was beyond anything he'd expected. For the first time that evening, he truly looked at her. Not as a street child asking for scraps, but as someone who had just handed him the missing piece of a multi-million-dollar puzzle. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Emma," she said simply. "Where are your parents, Emma?" Her expression shifted, a shadow passing over her young face. "My mom died last year. We used to live in a shelter. Now I don't know where I belong." Marcus stared at her, unable to find words. The restaurant continued its elegant dance around them, but he felt as if time had stopped. This child, brilliant, hungry, alone, had materialized out of nowhere to solve his problem and break his heart in the same breath. Without thinking, he said the only thing that came to him. "Do you want to come with me? Just for tonight. I'll get you some real food and shoes." Emma hesitated, studying his face with eyes that seemed far too old for her age. Then she nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. As soon as they stepped outside, the sharp chill of the evening air wrapped around them. Marcus instinctively took off his blazer and placed it gently over Emma's shoulders. The fabric hung heavily on her small frame, but she hugged it close like it was the warmest thing she'd ever worn. He looked down at her bare feet, now stepping cautiously on the cold pavement, and without saying a word, he led her to his waiting car. The driver opened the door with a confused glance, but Marcus's nod silenced any questions. Once inside, the quiet hum of the luxury vehicle filled the silence as Emma stared at the glowing city lights rushing past her window. She didn't speak, but her expression shifted from cautious to curious as they drove deeper into Manhattan. Marcus tapped out a quick text to his assistant. "Call my personal shopper. I need warm clothes. Age 6 or 7, girls. Drop off at my apartment. Also food. Something comforting." He hesitated. Ed then added, "Toys, too. Something soft." He wasn't sure what he was doing. He wasn't the kind of man who brought strangers, especially children, into his private world. His life was sharp-edged, minimal, designed for control and efficiency, not softness. But this girl had cracked something open inside him in the most unexpected way. They arrived at his penthouse just past midnight. The elevator opened directly into the marble-floored living room, flooded with soft, warm light. Emma stepped in cautiously, her eyes widening as she took in the massive windows overlooking the city, the tall bookshelves, and the sleek modern furniture. It was the kind of space designed for prestige, not comfort. Marcus suddenly saw it through her eyes, sterile, cold, lifeless. "You can sit anywhere you like," he said, unsure of how to speak to her in this context. Emma wandered slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the glass coffee table before settling onto the large sofa, legs tucked under her. Within 30 minutes, his assistant arrived with shopping bags, clothing, food from one of the best late-night diners in the city, and a small collection of comfort items. While Emma devoured a grilled cheese sandwich and tomato soup, Marcus sat opposite her, pretending to scroll through his emails but mostly just watching her. The way she held the spoon with both hands, the way her eyes lit up when she tasted something warm. There was nothing performative in her gratitude, just quiet relief, as if she'd been holding her breath for months and could finally exhale. When she finished, he handed her a new pair of pajamas, soft cotton with little stars, and pointed toward the guest room down the hall. "It's yours for tonight," he said. "There's a bathroom inside. Take your time." She disappeared for 20 minutes, and when she returned, her face was freshly washed and she was wearing the new pajama, as slightly oversized but cozy. She was holding a small stuffed bear from the gift bag, gripping it tightly by one arm. Marcus stood awkwardly in the hallway, uncertain of how to say goodnight to a child. "Thank you," Emma said quietly. "I haven't slept in a real bed in a long time." His throat tightened unexpectedly. "You're safe here," he replied. "Get some rest." When he closed the door behind her, he stood in the hallway for a long moment, staring at nothing. His apartment, usually so silent and serene, now carried the faint sounds of another heartbeat, another life breathing within these walls. He sat in his home office, staring at the contract she had helped him understand, and realized he owed more than just gratitude. He owed her answers. Why a child like her was on the street, why no one had come looking, why the system had failed someone so bright and capable. He pulled out his laptop and began typing her name into search databases, reaching out to contacts in social services, accessing networks he'd never needed before. There was barely any record of her. A few shelter logs, a hospital admission when her mother died, but after that, nothing. It was as if she'd slipped between the cracks of the world, invisible to everyone who should have been watching. By the time he finally went to bed, the sun was beginning to rise outside his windows. The sky had turned a pale violet, and for the first time in years, Marcus didn't feel tired after an all-nighter. He walked past the guest room and opened the door just a crack. Emma was fast asleep, her small form curled beneath the blanket, the stuffed bear tucked against her chest. In the quiet morning light, watching her breathe softly and peacefully, Marcus knew something fundamental had changed. Not just for her, but for him too. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the wide windows of Marcus's penthouse, casting long golden lines across the floors. Emma was still asleep when Marcus stepped out of his bedroom, already dressed in a tailored suit, but moving with none of his usual urgency. For the first time in over a decade, he postponed his morning meetings. Today, there were more important things to understand. By the time Emma woke up, breakfast was already set on the kitchen island. Real pancakes, scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, and a glass of orange juice. She approached the food hesitantly, like it might vanish if she reached for it too quickly. "Eat as much as you want," Marcus said, sitting across from her with his coffee. Emma began slowly, then with growing confidence. Between bites, she looked around the apartment with curiosity. "Do you live here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Always have." Her face scrunched slightly, as if that answer was hard to understand. "No kids? No wife?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Nope, just me and work. Until now, I guess." After breakfast, they moved to the living room where he brought over the documents she had translated the night before. "Can you tell me how you knew all this?" he asked gently. Emma looked down at her hands. "My mom was really smart. She used to do translation work from home, Spanish, French, sometimes even Portuguese. She homeschooled me for a while after we lost our apartment, said books were safer than most people." Marcus could see the truth of that written across her young face. "And after she passed?" he asked as gently as he could. "Shelters, mostly," Emma answered matter-of-factly. "Some were okay, some were bad. I ran away from the last one a few months ago. It didn't feel safe anymore." He leaned back, trying to process the weight of what she had just said so simply. She was 6, maybe 7, and had been navigating more instability in a year than most adults faced in a lifetime. "How could someone like you, so smart, so capable, just disappear into the system?" Emma shrugged. "Smart kids are harder to place. People think we don't need as much help." Marcus made more calls that day, not to colleagues or clients, but to child services, hospitals, old shelter records. He wanted proof of her story, documentation that confirmed she existed in the official world. But again and again, he hit walls. In the bureaucracy, Emma was barely more than a ghost. Meanwhile, the girl remained calm, almost too calm, like she had already learned not to expect too much from adults. She sat in his office area with a children's book he had ordered that morning, reading silently, occasionally glancing up to make sure he was still there. And he always was. Later that afternoon, he took her shopping. Not because he wanted to show off, but because she needed things. Shoes, proper clothes, a warm coat, more pajamas. As they walked through the store, she held his hand without hesitation, and when he asked her opinion about a dress or jacket, she answered directly, sometimes with enthusiasm, sometimes with an unimpressed shrug that made him chuckle. They stopped for ice cream afterward, sitting on a bench outside a small park, the city bustling around them. "I don't know why you're helping me," Emma said between licks of strawberry swirl. "Most people don't even look at me when I talk to them." Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked at her, really looked, and said, "Because you're the first person who's helped me in a long time, and because you shouldn't have to do any of this alone anymore." That night, after Emma fell asleep again in the guest room, Marcus sat in his office in the dark, the soft hum of the city outside his windows. He thought about his life, his perfect schedule, his clean routines, his glass and steel fortress of solitude. None of it felt as solid now as the sound of her small footsteps on the marble floor or the image of her tiny hand gripping his without fear. She was still technically a stranger, but something in his chest whispered that wasn't true anymore. He opened his laptop and began researching something entirely new: how to become a legal guardian. He didn't know where this path would lead, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't sending her back into the darkness, not when she had already brought this much light into his world. The week that followed settled into a rhythm that neither Marcus nor Emma had expected. It wasn't perfect, but it felt surprisingly natural. Mornings began with shared breakfasts, Marcus learning to make things beyond his usual coffee and toast, while Emma, eager to help, mastered the art of squeezing orange juice and even attempted scrambling eggs. Emma had a habit of humming while she worked in the kitchen, quiet, off-key melodies that somehow made the space feel warmer. Marcus, still adjusting to the sounds of life in his home, found himself slowing down in the mornings just to listen. During the day, Marcus worked from home more often than not. Emma quickly understood that when he was behind the glass door of his office, it meant quiet time. But still, she would occasionally slip in barefoot and cautious, carrying one of her books or a thoughtful question about the world outside. "Why do companies need so many meetings?" she asked one afternoon. "Why is money so important if it doesn't make people happy?" He answered as best he could, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with humor, always with honesty. She listened with an attention that seemed years beyond her age, though she never stopped doodling in the margins of her notebook while he spoke. In the evenings, they explored small corners of the city together. Marcus took her to quiet bookstores where she could browse for hours, to small museums where she stared with fascination at paintings and sculptures, and to cozy neighborhood diners where no one knew who he was or cared about his business empire. Sometimes they ordered takeout and sprawled across the living room couch, watching movies. Marcus had never thought he'd learn the names of animated characters or develop opinions about which ones were Emma's favorites, but now he did. It surprised him how much he enjoyed these simple moments. But it wasn't all lightness. There were nights when Emma would wake up from nightmares, not with screams or drama, but with soft, muffled cries she tried to hide. Marcus heard her once, sitting curled up on the floor of the guest bathroom in the dark, arms wrapped around her knees. When he found her, she tried to smile through her tears. "Just a sad dream," she whispered. He sat beside her on the cold bathroom tiles and said nothing at first, just stayed until her shoulders stopped shaking. Then, quietly, he asked if she wanted to talk about it. Slowly, hesitantly, she told him about the last shelter she had lived in. The cramped beds, the yelling at night, the constant fear of being moved again without warning. She told him about her mother, how she used to sing lullabies in Spanish and tell stories from old books they read together by lamplight. "She said words were stronger than walls," Emma whispered, "but words didn't keep her alive when she got sick." Marcus didn't have magic words to fix that kind of pain. Instead, he said simply, "I'm not going anywhere, Emma. Not tomorrow, not next week, not ever. I promise you that." She didn't respond with words, but she leaned against him, and in that moment, That was enough. Later that week, Marcus took the next crucial step. He brought Emma to meet one of his lawyers, a kind woman named Clara Rodriguez, who specialized in family law and had extensive experience with guardianship cases. They met in Clara's warm, comfortable office, a space designed to feel safe rather than intimidating. Clara spoke to Emma gently, never like a case to be, processed, but like a person who mattered. Emma answered questions carefully but openly, describing what she remembered about her mother, their time in various shelters, how long she'd been surviving on her own. Clara took notes but never rushed, never made Emma feel like she was being interrogated. Marcus watched the entire exchange with quiet tension, wanting to protect Emma from any discomfort but knowing she needed to tell her story in her own words. When the meeting ended, Clara told Marcus privately that the path wouldn't be simple. Without clear documentation or family records, guardianship will take time and persistence. But, she added with a meaningful look, you're the first adult to fight this hard for her welfare, and that counts for more than you realize. Back at the penthouse, Emma asked quietly, "Will I have to go to court?" Marcus explained the process as gently as he could, how some people would need to ask questions to make sure she was safe and cared for, how it was all designed to protect children like her. She nodded thoughtfully, processing this information with the same seriousness she brought to everything else. "Will you be there with me?" she asked. Marcus looked her in the eye and answered without hesitation, "Every single step of the way." That night, as he tucked her into bed and turned out the lights, Marcus realized something profound had shifted in his life. He wasn't just providing temporary shelter anymore. He was fighting for her, building a future that neither of them had planned but both clearly needed. For the first time in years, he knew exactly why he was waking up each morning, and it had nothing to do with quarterly reports or business expansion. It was for a small girl with eyes full of untold stories and a laugh that had filled the silence of his once empty home. 2 weeks after the court hearing that would determine Emma as future, Marcus received the phone call that changed everything. He had been sitting at his kitchen table, watching Emma as she carefully arranged colored cutouts in her handmade scrapbook, a project she'd started to document their time together. When his phone rang and Clara's name appeared on the screen, his stomach clenched with anticipation. He walked out onto his balcony before answering, both to avoid worrying Emma and to prepare himself for any outcome. "It's official, Marcus," Clara's warm voice came through the line. "The court approved temporary guardianship with a clear pathway toward full adoption if that's your choice. Congratulations, Emma is officially in your care." For several seconds, Marcus couldn't speak. The city sprawled below him as it always had, but everything in his personal world felt suspended, like a photograph frozen in time. The weight of uncertainty he'd been carrying dissolved into something he hadn't dared to fully hope for: relief, gratitude, and an overwhelming sense of purpose. When he returned inside, Emma looked up immediately, her intuition picking up on the shift in his energy. He knelt beside her chair, took her small hands in his, and said gently, "You're staying, Emma. For good, if you want to." She stared at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded, and without a word, wrapped her arms tightly around his neck. They stayed that way for a long time, her small arms holding him like an anchor, as if she had finally allowed herself to believe it was real. In the days that followed, their life didn't become perfect, but it became beautifully, steadily routine. Marcus enrolled Emma in a private school known for working with children who had experienced trauma and disrupted education. On her first morning, she clutched his hand nervously as they walked through the bright hallways. "You belong here just as much as anyone," he told her, kneeling down to her eye level. "And I'll be right here when your day ends." When he picked her up that afternoon, she was carrying a new book and chatting animatedly with another girl her age. The sight filled Marcus with a quiet pride he'd never known he could feel. They established rituals that became the foundation of their new life together. Sunday afternoons were for bookstore adventures and ice cream. Friday nights meant movies and takeout spread across the living room floor. Every morning, Emma left him a small drawing or note on the kitchen counter, sometimes just a silly face, other times a message like, "Thanks for not giving up on me," or "You're getting better at pancakes." Marcus kept every single one in a special drawer in his office, each note a reminder of how far they had both traveled from that first night in the restaurant. One weekend, Emma asked if they could visit the cemetery where her mother was buried. Marcus drove them to the modest memorial garden outside the city, where Emma placed fresh flowers by a simple stone marker. She had written a letter beforehand, which she read aloud in her clear, strong voice. She told her mother about her new home, about the stuffed bear she still slept with every night, about the man who made her feel safe and valued. "I miss you every day," she concluded, "but I'm okay now. I'm really okay." Marcus didn't try to fill the silence afterward. Some moments were too sacred for words. That evening, they sat together on his balcony, watching the sky transform from blue to orange to deep purple over the glittering city. Emma leaned her head against his shoulder and said quietly, "I think my mom would really like you." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. "I hope so, sweetheart." Emma was quiet for a moment, then added, "You don't have to be perfect, you know. You're just you, and that's exactly right." Marcus smiled, feeling something settle deep in his chest. For the first time in his adult life, he didn't feel the compulsive need to analyze, optimize, or control the future. He was content to sit here with her, watching the world spread out before them, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. Marcus Chen had once believed that success was measured in control, in strategy, in keeping everyone at arm's length to avoid vulnerability. But now he understood something far more valuable. His greatest achievement wasn't the skyscrapers that bore his company's name or the business empire he had built through sheer determination. His greatest success was sitting right beside him, small and brave and brilliant, looking at the world with curious eyes that had learned to trust again. Emma had walked into his life asking for leftovers, and somehow she had ended up with all of him. In return, she had given him the one thing he'd never known he was missing: a family. The word felt strange and wonderful in his mind. Family. Not built through blood or traditional circumstances, but forged through choice, through showing up, through the daily decision to love and protect and believe in each other. As the city lights began to twinkle below them and Emma dozed against his shoulder, Marcus realized this was what happiness actually looked like. Not the sharp satisfaction of closing a deal or the temporary high of financial success, but this quiet, steady warmth of knowing you matter to someone who matters to you. He had spent years building walls to protect himself, only to discover that the best protection was opening his heart to exactly the right person. And sometimes that person comes disguised as a hungry child asking for leftovers, carrying wisdom far beyond her years and the power to change everything.